Hey, leaders. In this episode of Building a Culture of Collaboration, Kurtis and I are once again joined by Darrin Peppard, leadership speaker, coach, host of the Leaning into Leadership podcast, and a best-selling author, including Road to Awesome, The Journey of a Leader. We first met Darrin in episode 12 and are excited to revisit and go deeper on some of the ideas and concepts he first shared in that conversation. We're also going to dig further into the importance of trust and reflection when leading a collaborative culture. So let's get started.
Intentional and purposeful focus on building a culture of collaboration is the secret for leaders striving to make a difference. In building a culture of collaboration, Kurtis and Lorna Hewson will share simple tips, ideas, and strategies to take your organization's collaborative efforts to the next level.
Welcome to another episode of Building a Culture of Collaboration. As always, I'm Kurtis Hewson, co-founder and lead learner of Jigsaw Learning.
And I'm Lorna Hewson.
So today we're joined once again by our friend Darrin Peppard, president of Road to Awesome. Great to see you once again, Darrin.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me in. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Interesting to hear you talk there in the lead in about back on episode 12, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that probably just seems like so long ago, right?
That's right. Well, we recently re-listened to that episode, and there was so much learning, so much you shared about the work that you do and about your learning through your experiences too, which are highly impactful and wanting to be able to reconnect again. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that we throw that link into the show notes here as well. But for those that haven't heard that episode, can you give us just the Cole's Notes version of who you are and what got you to this point in your educational career, Darrin?
Yeah, for sure. So, Dr. Darrin Peppard, 26 years in public education here in the United States, started as a middle school teacher. I was a high school teacher. I was a coach along the way through their multiple sports. I was an assistant principal at the high school level, high school principal and superintendent. So I ran the gamut really in public education. And I think probably, if we dig into maybe an origin story, if you will, and I think I might have talked about this on episode 12, but maybe that moment in time when it all kind of shifted for me. Kind of that wake up moment, if you will, or I like to call it my two roads moment, right? When two roads diverged. I probably had two of those in my career. Well, maybe a third that has led me to doing what I'm doing now. But the first one was as an assistant principal working in a school where, unbeknownst to us, we really had a pretty toxic climate, and we were all about catching people doing things wrong. And in a staff meeting, somebody said to me, we're trying to solve, most important issues in education. We're like, what are we going to do about hats, and what are we going to do about cell phones and that kind of stuff? And somebody just finally said, Darrin, why does it always have to be about what they do wrong? Why can't it be about what they do right? And in that moment, really for me, the two roads, and this is where Road to Awesome comes from too, right? The two roads kind of diverged for me, and it was, how do I want to show up? Do I want to keep being the guy who's all about catching and doing it wrong, or do we want to start focusing on what they do right? Fast forward to my principalship, and I moved from assistant principal to principal in the same building. And that first year, it was a nightmare. Not just for me, but probably for everybody around me, because like so many early career leaders, and we see this now, man, we see it everywhere. So many people are jumping into the role and they're just not quite ready. And you're really not ready until you do it. But, man, I every day I threw on the cape, and I was going to be the superhero at my school, and I was going to solve everybody's problems, and I was going to be, the smartest one in the room, and have the answer to every question. And we'll probably talk about it a little bit more later, but it's truly the trap of servant leadership, because so often I think people believe that being the servant leader means you have to do everything for everybody, and that's just completely false. Yeah. So that was kind of my deal too, and I was fortunate to work with a leadership coach in, I think, my second year as a building principal, and here comes that second two roads moment. He said to me after watching me, put out fires like crazy to start a day, Darrin, do you want to be a firefighter or you want to be a leader? You
Mm.
got to decide who you want to be. And boom, there you go. Two roads, right? And it was okay. I don't want to just be a firefighter. And most of the leaders I work with now, they don't want to be firefighters either. They
Oh,
genuinely want to lead their schools. And so I guess my third two roads moment was leaving public education and becoming a full-time leadership speaker, leadership coach, leadership consultant, and leadership author, and working now with schools across North America to help leaders just get a little bit more clear about what matters to them, to be a little bit more intentional with their time and their communication and with the actions they choose to take, and honestly, just help them walk in their purpose. So that's probably a little longer than what you were looking for, but
it's
Oh, no,
that's
perfect.
it's
who I
great.
am right there, man. There you go.
I really appreciate almost that full circle of having that mentor that kind of gives you the, are you a
Mhm.
firefighter or a leader? And I
Yeah.
am quite certain that maybe not the same words, but I'm sure that in your role now, you're having that conversation with others as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I know that so many of them, they don't want to be in that space, like we were
No.
talking. So as we're sitting here recording this, I was in Nashville a week ago, speaking at the AMLE conference, so Association for Mid-Level Educators, and big, huge conference. And after my speaking piece, where I spoke about school leadership and spoke about that specific dynamic, the firefighter and leader. I had a handful of people wait around to talk to me, but one in particular, you guys have probably seen this too, right? Where somebody waits until the very end. Like
Uh-huh.
they don't want any, but number one, they didn't want anybody to hear what they had to say. And number two, they want to make sure, like, I want to get a couple of extra minutes with Darrin. And this young lady came up to me and she said, everything you said just spoke right into my heart. And that makes you feel good. And
Yeah.
she said, um, but I don't know if I can get any clarity. I was just hired on Monday. So this is Monday in November, and this person has been
Oh.
hired as a principal. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to put my arm around you and help
Yeah.
you. That's all I want to do. And so, I mean,
Oh.
hopefully we end up getting to work together. But yeah, when I think about, the leaders that I get to work with, certainly her challenge is pretty extreme, but it is a lot of just, every situation's a bit different and everybody's got to figure out,
Yeah.
how do I step away from just being that crisis solver that,
Mm.
they think they need to be. And certainly I fell into that trap big time.
Hmm.
We did too. And just that idea of, trying to fill that space of leadership and having that idea in your head that you need to be the one
Right.
with all the answers, right? But
Yeah.
understanding that it's so much more and that it really truly is about, how do we create a collaborative culture focused on support?
Yeah. You know,
Absolutely.
I this is something that we had talked about, and I love that you went right there to start us off around that Superman syndrome. It
Yeah.
was very much a theme from our last conversation as well. So I'd love to get into some nitty-gritty around that, Darrin,
Of course.
because I think we understand that when we're thinking about building a culture of collaboration, which is what this podcast is about, the Superman syndrome runs counteractive to that. It actually erodes
Yeah.
that
Yes.
culture of
Yes.
collaboration. So, can you speak to that? Why you think that is?
Yeah.
And then what are some specific things that you think leaders could be doing next week to start
Right.
getting away from that Superman syndrome?
Right. Well, I kind of touched on it. I'm glad you came back to it because I think so often, I know when I went through my master's program, we were taught about servant leadership, and I'm sure we wrote,
Yep.
we read a few books where we talked about servant leadership. And the
There's
thing is,
Giovanni.
so often, well, oh yes, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Of course, Sir Giovanni, you had to go there. That's good.
Yeah.
But the mistake that so many early career leaders, and certainly myself included, make is that we fall into this false belief that servant leadership means I have to do it all for them.
Yeah.
When true servant leadership really is about empowering everybody around you to take on their portion of this collective shared vision you have of where you're trying to go. That's truly what servant leadership is. But man, it's so easy to fall into that trap. And I'll tell you what, I see, I'm not sure about your area. Actually, I'm fairly confident this is true probably in your area too. But we have so many leaders across the United States who are leading schools that are on their third or fourth principal in 4 years, or their sixth principal in 8, right? And in my case, I was only the third in 35 years. And so my failure with servant leadership was more, I just set out to prove I wasn't the previous guy. And in some ways, I probably undermined some great systems he had developed, just trying to not be him. But so many of our current folks, they have no idea what their systems are. You know, I mean, in many cases, they have maybe just jumped out of a classroom. And so being a systems thinker is not something that they're yet ready to take on at the leadership level. So when we talk about developing a culture of collaboration, getting those systems in place so that, you know, decision-making processes, so that, you know, time management processes, everything that goes into being the leader can have just some really good systems and processes so people know, who do I go to for this? What are the steps for this? Once you have that in place, it's almost like, okay, this is my lowest level of Maslow, right? Like I got to have some basic systems in place so I can survive.
Yeah.
And then now we can start to really lean into, let's empower people to take on all of the different things that will get us to where we want to be. And certainly having that collaborative environment, whether that's collaboration around teaching and learning in the classrooms, or that's collaboration around how we're developing systems for our bell and class schedules, or systems for whatever it might be, right? I think leaders, you know, to your question, a couple of things that leaders can do, first and foremost, is take a pause. Take a pause, and I like to call it balcony level leadership. I was a basketball coach. The video shot from the balcony. Yeah. Get up on the balcony and check in on yourself. What are you really working on? Where are you spending your time? Where are you focused? What really matters to you? You know, and by doing that, you give yourself a chance to say, okay, who are the people now that I can start to lean into? So you can start to build that inner circle, that next level circle. And I think just leaning into the relationships and developing that trust, you can't get to a culture of collaboration until you have a culture of trust first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it does happen very similarly to what you were saying, that, you know, leaders are jumping into that position right from the classroom without having, even maybe in some instances, not even having the thought of what it is to be a leader, never mind experience in any way, or perhaps any learning that needs to go on there. And really, it does take such courage to be a leader who is focused on strategic planning and really being able to grow that community. We often talk about the difference between having managers in that position and having leaders who are really understanding that systems approach to leading and learning.
Well, and I think with the systems side of this too, is sometimes it can be really overwhelming when you're thinking about all the systems that come into an organization. But I love the last time we chatted where you reinforced, you know, start with some small things. You had said one of the systems you created is you stopped walking down the hall, and when someone would say, do you have a minute, stopping and then being late for whatever you were going to get to, and instead empowering your front office to be able to say, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to chat. Contact Marilyn, and she'll get you into my calendar. So like, that's just one small little system. But when you start stacking these systems on, we can get to something that's highly, highly complex through the build.
I think too,
Absolutely.
I think we too really think about when we use that word systems and processes or those words, then we sometimes think of something really complex, and it's not always that way.
I love that you said it that way. I remember, working with my leadership coach at first, and it was that exact conversation. It was, Darren, we need to put some systems in place. And in my head, I'm seeing like this giant sheet of graph paper, and all these triangles and arrows, and
The flow chart.
like some kind of engineering sheet, right? And Tom's like, no, 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 that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just like, kind of like that, if this, then that. Like, so, and we were walking in the hallway and I got stopped 3 times. And he's like, here's a simple system we could probably put together. You get stopped all the time.
Yeah, of course.
What would be something that if they stop you, they could do so that you don't have to do it for them? That's a good. The system was not as smooth as what it became. What we talked about there, where it was, hey, shoot Marilyn an email. She'll get you on the calendar. I'll come to you. That took some time. That took some, working through the system. At first, it was I carried a little notebook, with like a little spiral thing, and I would jot it down, and I'd be like, okay, hey, Kurtis, I'll get back to you later today, and I would get back, and I would have this just pile of notes, and it was better than trying to remember, okay, who all stopped me in the hallway today, right? Who are the students who stopped me? Because typically it was the students that, like, those ones didn't even stick in my head. It was okay, so Bruce down in room 305 stopped me, and Ted in this room stopped me, and so forth, right? But I wasn't remembering the kids. But yeah, when you start to just think about, as a leader, what are the things, I like to call them time bandits? Like, what are the things that are stealing my time? And what might be a couple of steps I can take to streamline that process so that I'm not constantly being pulled away from this, that, or the other thing, the things that really, really matter. I mean, again, if we want to build collaborative cultures, we want to put people around us who can help us to put these systems in place, who can help us to where we're not the person who has to do everything for everybody. And, you're right. When teachers are first jumping out of the classroom and they haven't really even thought that through, they certainly haven't thought through systems thinking, the skill set of being a great classroom teacher and being a great school leader, they're not exactly in perfect alignment. I mean, there's a different set of skills. Some are transferable. All of them can be grown. It just takes time. And it takes being intentional about it.
Well, and I think too, with the idea of when you have systems in place, then I can start leaning in, as you've said, to who are the other leaders or aspiring leaders or people with really strong skill sets that then we can put into these systems and let the systems coordinate and build the work. And I always remember a conversation that had with Jay McTighe. So, Jay and Grant Wiggins, all the backwards by design. Well, Jay was talking from a leadership perspective and had said, as leaders, you have to you have to set the banks of the river. That's your job. Set the banks, but then don't try and micromanage the flow of the water. Let the water flow. Let good people do good work, but without you setting banks, or in our language, creating systems, that work's going to sprawl. It's going to go every which direction and not really have two things that you have said are incredibly important: clarity and intentionality. We'll lack those two things if we don't set the banks.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and when we lack those things, and I really like Jay's analogy on that. That's really, really, really good. But when we lack that clarity, when we lack that intentionality, that's when the micromanaging starts to happen.
Yes.
And sometimes it's because we're just simply not clear on what we want. Sometimes it's we don't trust the others around us to do the work that they're expected to do. But here's an interesting one that I've started to see percolate its way up in micromanagement that doesn't fit the normal like what you would expect of a micromanager.
We'll be right back to continue this
There
episode.
are two things that we know. The first is that implementing and sustaining collaborative response in schools is complex work. The second is that educators love a bargain. For this year's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we are planning something to address both of these realities. We are slashing the price of our Supporting Collaborative Response on-demand workshop bundle by 75%.
For 4 days only, our Supporting Collaborative Response workshop library is going to be available for only $50, reduced from our regular price of $200. So what do you get for only $50? You get a series of on-demand workshops, each focused on a particular aspect of collaborative response. There are currently 9 workshops, including an overview of collaborative response, but we plan to continue to add to the library over time.
Topics like creating focus for collaborative planning without micromanaging your teams, and 10 considerations when refining and utilizing your continuums of support are just 2 of the titles currently available. These 20 to 40 minute workshops are facilitated by myself or Lorna Hewson and include numerous resources and samples. They have been recorded so that they can be played and replayed as often as you wish. There is no expiration date for these workshops, so access them when it works best for you. In the time it takes to eat your lunch, you can engage in one of the workshops. This amazing offer is only available to our JL Insiders email list, so don't delay.
Join the JL Insiders by going to jigsawlearning.ca and clicking on the link at the bottom of the page to become a JL Insider. You can also go to bit.ly/J, lowercase insider to sign up. That's bit.ly/J, lowercase insider.
On November 29th, our JL Insiders will receive the exclusive code to access the entire workshop library for only $50. That's $150 in savings off our regular price. Check out the website jigsawlearning.ca to learn more and join the JL Insiders to have a chance at this incredible Black Friday Cyber Monday deal.
And now back to our conversation.
And it's the folks who are not afraid to let other people do the work. They're afraid to ask them to do the work. And not because they don't think they're capable, but because they're afraid of overloading them, of putting too much on their plate. Or, you know, in some case, I was working with a school district last year in Nevada that the building principal and his team just simply said, we can't ask this of our people. We're afraid they'll quit. So now in their case, that was a bit extreme, and we worked through that. But I've heard it from quite a few leaders of, oh no, I'll just do that for them. I started with a group last year, another client that I'm continuing with this year. And one of the elementary principals, when I first met her, she was telling me about how the night before she worked really, really late because she was screen printing T-shirts for her school. And I remember saying, why were you doing that? And she's like, well, I don't want to ask that of this person, or I don't want to, they have plenty on their plate. And so the principal is going to screen print T-shirts.
Yeah.
I mean, is there somebody else who could be doing this? Yes, there's somebody else who could be doing this. Is there somebody else who's maybe it's more realistic? I mean, what are things you can do and only you can do versus things that pretty much anybody can do?
Yeah.
We as leaders sometimes will take on I'll just do it all for them because I don't want to overwhelm them. And the truth, and this was a big eye opener for me in working with my secretary. The more I gave her, the more she thrived. She was like, oh no, I want to do that for you. I want to help you with that. That's, you mentioned, Kurtis, the system of, me getting stopped in the hallway. Hey, shoot Marilyn an email. She came up with that. Originally it was, okay, if I bring my notes back to you, can you transcribe those? And she's like, yeah. And then finally she's like, hey, how about you just have them email me and I'll just take care of it. Perfect.
Brilliant.
Right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. I wasn't going to think of that one, but she was happy to do that. She's like, no, let me do these things. And my original topic sentence here before I tangentially chased off into the sweet by and by was, we tend sometimes to micromanage because we don't want to ask of others. And the truth is, we don't mean to be micromanagers, but that's truly being a micromanager. Let your people do their work. Give them the opportunity, create the vision. That's your job as a leader. Create that compelling vision, create the banks. I love that analogy. And then let it go. Let them do their job. That's why they're there.
You know what, Darrin, it's really interesting thinking about that perspective of principals saying, well, I'm going to do it because I'm just afraid to put it on. And all of that comes from good intention of supporting their people and trying to make sure that nobody's overwhelmed. But at the same time, that almost robs them of the ability to develop some leadership skills when we're putting them in positions of being able to lead some of the work and putting them in collaborative teams, creating that culture where everyone is contributing and really, again, building those leadership skills that we so want the majority of our teams to have.
Yeah. So I'm reminded of an experience that we had that sums this up perfectly, and it'll lead into the next question after a little bit of my opportunity to ramble over into another.
Go for it.
So we were having these meeting structures that we had set up where we would be identifying students, key issues that they're having, and what could we do, and found out that, we wanted to have our educational assistants or paraprofessionals part of these conversations. They're really important on our team, and they're right in there with the kids. And we found that when they came in, and I'll give you one specific example. We were talking about a student in this elementary. The teacher was frustrated because if only the kid did some of their home reading passages with their parents, we'd accomplish a lot more. And we hit a point of, it's not happening. And that's out of our locus of control. And it was one of our EAs that said, when I get here every morning, that child's already out on the playground. They get here early, and we all knew that. What if I were to bring them in and I'll just do 10 minutes before the start of the school day? I'll do that home reading with them. And then, that should accomplish it. And it was a perfect example of, I don't think I would have ever asked that person to do that for exactly what you said, of asking them to go more and put more on their plates. But it came from the person who was empowered. In fact, in the conversation, we determined 2 other students that would benefit from that. And then as a leader, I found a way to get her out of the building 10 minutes earlier at the end of the day, which actually was a huge win for her to get out before the buses went. Like it was, again, the idea of creating the space for that to happen was what was the critical. So love to ask you, what are some different ways that you or any of the leaders that you work with create space for that to happen? Because sometimes we get trapped in we're too busy to collaborate.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the big takeaway I have from that, and we'll talk about creating that space, but is just simply listening as a leader.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about a extremely overlooked and mission critical item is listen to your people. One of the most important things you can do as a leader is just listen. One of the best leaders I ever worked with was actually the principal that I took over from, and he had this practice, and I asked him about it once because I started to notice it. I worked with him for 5 years, and when we were in meetings, when there was a decision to be made, when there was maybe a conflict to be resolved, he almost always was the last person in the room to speak. And it wasn't that he didn't know where he wanted to go. He knew exactly where he wanted to go, but he wanted to make sure every voice had an opportunity to be heard. And odds were always strong. And I remember him telling me this. He said, odds are pretty good. Somebody's going to come up with the idea I have.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's okay. I mean, at the end of the day, it's my decision to make. But man, how powerful is it if the same decision I would have just made came from somebody else in the room?
Yeah.
And I think the more we do that as leaders, I think that's how you create space. It's just don't talk.
Yeah.
This gets back to the early career leader thing, right? I mean, as an early career leader, you want to speak up. I got the answer. I'm going to solve the problem. Just shut your mouth and be quiet and listen, because you've got intelligent people around you. And Kurtis, your example is wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, coming from a paraprofessional, hey, how about I just do this? That's brilliant.
It was absolutely.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And then you on the backside of it, a little bit of culture building, hey, you're doing this. How about I get you out the door 10 minutes early? Yeah. You can get to your kid's school to pick them up quicker, or whatever it is that person needs, or you can just get out ahead of the bus. That's a culture builder. And it all came from the fact that you listened. So to me, that's how you create the space. And you ask for, maybe leaders that I work with. I have a second year leader that I'm coaching, and she has taken over a pretty challenging situation. She was in the classroom in this building for quite some time. Her predecessor was somebody who was really good at saying yes, to the point of where he never said no. In other words, he just didn't want anything to do with conflict. And so now she is having to, let's say she's having to build those banks, right?
Right.
And in many of our conversations, she and I have discussed what it is that she specifically is looking for. What is it she specifically wants to see when she's going in her classrooms now? And now here in year 2, she's getting quite a bit stronger in terms of what she wants. But she began her school year with the need to develop her school improvement plan. And a thing that many, many leaders just sit down and they just do, or maybe they bring in the counselor, or they bring in a couple of lead teachers. She's in a fairly small school, but she used everybody on staff and put them in different committees and gave them the opportunity to take on different pieces of this improvement plan. And I was just at her school, maybe about 2 weeks ago. And just the dramatic difference between where she is now and where she was a little over a year ago. And I think that buy-in piece, she's created that space where everybody has a voice. For me, it was always seen, heard, valued, trusted. That's how I wanted everybody on our campus to feel. And I'm seeing her do that work and really get everybody buying in. And they're coming to her with, hey, what if we tried this? Or, hey, I did this in my classroom and it really worked well. What if, right? Those types of things. So I think those are ways that you really share it out.
To me, you just demonstrated what we constantly talk to in schools of when we've got a really powerful culture of collaboration and one that's innovative, we hear those words more than any others. What if? Those are two really powerful words. And I've seen leaders that intentionally build it into their language, that even if they have the idea that they're going to run with, they still phrase it with the what if, because the next person says, that's a really good idea, but what if, and they tack on one other piece to it. And oh my goodness, we've now arrived at something that no one person could have come up with on their own. I think that,
well, and it's creating that aspirational culture.
Yeah.
I mean, and that again, that as the school leader, your job is to create this compelling vision. Like I see where I believe our school can be in a year, in 2 years. But that in and of itself is a what if statement.
Yeah.
What if we do all of these things? Then what might happen? And the more people are saying, what if? Or I love that you caught that. For me, one of my favorites has always been, how might we? Instead of, let's do this. How might we do something like this. Again, that came back to the leader that I worked with, who just sat back and sat back and sat back. And honestly, if the right thing didn't come forward and he had something, eventually he sat forward. But being the last one to speak, or nearly last one to speak, and just listening, and I mean, my leadership toolbox has always been led with questions. I think that's why I love coaching leaders so much. People would come to me with, early in my career, it was, hey, what do we do in this situation? And I would just tell them. But over time, as I started to figure out a little bit more what it meant to truly be a leader, it became, what are you thinking you might want to do?
Yeah.
What steps might you take? Turn it back and give them the opportunity, to the point where, and I think we talked about this on episode 12, but maybe we didn't. There was almost a running joke with my principals and assistant principals when I was a superintendent. They would come to me with, or when I was in a building or something, they'd say, okay, now I have a question for you. And I know you're going to answer it with a question, but here's what I'm wondering. And then, okay, well, tell me what you might want to do. I knew you were going to say that. Okay, well, but you have an answer, don't you? And of course they did. And usually it was pretty good. Okay, hey, let's kick that around. Let's what if that a little bit. What if you do that? What might happen?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Darrin, we loved the story that you told us in episode 12 about leading from the balcony and the experience that you had to get to that place. And we know that within that, the kind of the moral of the story was reflection and reflective time, where you needed to be able to be intentional about that time for reflection. And just wondering, how do you help leaders to invest in that reflective time, knowing that you have to create space for it, you have to be intentional about that reflection time, and that it doesn't just happen as you are moving through the busyness of your day. So what are some of the suggestions that you give to leaders to create that intentional reflection time?
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
We have all felt like this before when engaging in team meetings, feeling like our time is not being maximized, or that this could have just been an email. As a leader, how can we ensure this is not the reality for everyone in the room? Rather than just simply coming together into a shared space, we really need to ensure that whenever we are engaging as a team in meetings, that the time is being utilized to its utmost, and that we are truly seeing impact as a result of our conversations. My name is Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. In this free on-demand webinar, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 planning considerations and then 5 facilitation considerations that you can put into place as a leader to take your team meetings to the next level. Access this webinar, and in addition to these 10 considerations, numerous free resources will be shared that you can begin using immediately. I can't wait to have you join me to learn how we can ensure that team meetings are having their optimal impact.
And now back to our conversation.
I think there's a couple that come to mind. I mean, we talked about in episode 12, we talked about the balcony. One of my favorite reflective activities for leaders is something I call start, stop, continue, consider. And I think this is a great activity to do with your entire staff. It's a great thing to do with your leadership team. And it's great to do on your own. And I'll be honest with you, I do it still, like on my own. I not long ago, I was almost a full day ahead of where I needed to be just because of my travel schedule. I had some downtime, and I did start, stop, continue, consider with my business, and did it using a Jamboard. So here's essentially the idea. We hear frequently from staff. I hear this from principals quite often, that staff feels like there's just too much on their plate. Well, let's actually find out, what do they think is on their plate? And again, you can do this with staff, you can do this for the leadership team, do it on your own. And I always just have them take like a big stack of Post-it notes. And the rules of the game are very simple. You can only put one thing on each Post-it note. And hey, what are the things that are on your plate right now? What is being asked of you? What is it that you think we are trying to accomplish? Just ask some of those leading questions and have them just put as many sticky notes as they can. And then I always put it around the room, 4 posters: start, stop, continue, consider. What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we consider doing? And what should we keep doing? Right? I mean, just those 4 things. What do we need to start doing? And honestly, this is a great, great reflection activity, because what you learn from your staff in terms of, hey, here's what we probably ought to start doing. They may say some things that you've been thinking, but you're afraid to go forward with it. What should we stop doing? I love stop, because so often, the first few times we did this when I was a building principal, we had things on the stop list that we stopped a long time ago, but some teachers didn't realize it and they were still clinging to it, right? Like, no, you don't have to do that anymore. We're not doing that anymore. Just stop it, let it go. And it helps them kind of go, oh, okay. Cool. That's good. Right. And then, what do we continue doing? In other words, what's going well? What are we doing really well right now? And then maybe what are some things we should consider doing instead of, at one point I worked in a district where our assistant superintendent in charge of curriculum, he was fantastic. But every time he went to a conference, we just cringed because we just knew he was going to come back with another initiative. Like, ooh, let's try this. And I think we had like 13 things going at once. Like, when do we just teach? Right? Like, I'm overwhelmed. Instead of knowing, hey, Darrin's going to a conference, he's coming back with something, it's just going to be, what should we consider? And maybe I share something in the consider space. Maybe I don't. Maybe I just wait and see what does everybody else have. Again, we're talking about, and the core of your work and your policy is about developing collaborative cultures. When you do activities like that, and yes, we as individuals need to do them, but man, what a great opportunity to get like that 360-degree view of what do people really feel like we're trying to do right now, what's overwhelming them, and without it being like, some anonymous survey kind of thing that just, worthless and a few people roast you. Those things don't help you.
No.
Activities like this, man, they work so well. One of the principals I'm working with, I shared it with him. He now has it on every one of his agendas for every staff meeting. And it's just a living document for them. They have 4 living walls: start, stop, continue, consider.
Yeah.
That's become their culture. And when we do that, man, you can't help but reflect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and it's that open agenda, right? Inviting everyone to give you your feedback, but like you said, not in a survey format, but in that open conversation about the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and I could imagine in that too, that when someone feels overwhelmed, just even putting it up on a wall allows somebody else to say, I can help you with that if you wanted to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Or that's this one thing that's taking up so much time on your plate. Let me tell you how I've figured out a way to reduce how much energy and effort time
sharing
takes.
Between staff.
Right.
Too.
So exactly.
Darrin, we always ask on this podcast, what advice would you give to somebody looking to create a culture of collaboration? When we asked you this first time, you said you discussed clarity, getting clarity, and creating that compelling vision, which you've pointed to both of them again as well. I'd love to hear, and for our audience, what are some really specific ways that you've either done personally or seen leaders do that you think really lends itself to creating clarity around a vision?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, to me, I mean, clarity, without clarity, we have nothing as leaders. And so I would tell you, one of the biggest steps with clarity is just to simply begin. And this is just a private exercise of what really are your educational values and what are your priorities? What are the things that you really want to see? Like as a leader, when I think about my values as a leader, it's not just what's important to me. That's a key element, but also what are the experiences? What are the feelings? What are the outcomes that my staff and my students should experience as a result of my leadership? That when we really can dig into pieces like that and get really clear about kind of that internal compass of our own
Mhm.
leadership, I think that really, really helps get us moving in the right direction on gaining some clarity.
Yeah.
I think another piece, another activity with clarity is to really start thinking about what it is that you expect. So often, we talk about the compelling vision, but often we don't know what we really expect. Now, I'm in classrooms with leaders all the time, and sometimes we'll walk into classrooms and I'll ask them, what are you looking for? And they don't have a good answer. Like,
Mhm.
well, this should come back to our values. This should come back to our vision. In some cases, there are schools that I work with where maybe they're saying, "Hey, we're looking for who's doing the work." Okay, so that tells me you value rigor, right? Because that's going to be a big driving piece there, right?
Mhm.
We've got to be really clear about what we're looking for and about what it is that we expect, and not just of others, but of ourselves as leaders. So that's another activity I think that really helps us gain that clarity to really think about just simply by expectations. And then the third one I think that's really, really important that helps with the clarity is now to examine how we communicate and what it is that we communicate. It's one thing to say, okay, these are my values. This is what's really important to me. It's another thing to say, okay, hey, this is what I'm really looking for. Now, how do I communicate that? Because we can have these two down well, and if we don't communicate it well, it doesn't matter. And it isn't just verbal communication. This is something I see with leaders all the time too. And it isn't even just like email communication. One of the most important elements in your communication are the actions that you take,
Yeah.
the behaviors that you exhibit. I worked with a leader at one point in time who just couldn't say enough about how important professional development was, and then he never showed up on professional development days.
Oh,
Those two things are incongruent.
Yeah.
yeah, for
You can't tell
sure.
me this and then do this. Your actions have to align with what you're looking for, what you expect, and what it is that you value. And if you can kind of get that triangle going, and that's just a lot of real deep self-reflection. I think that helps you then get the clarity that you're looking for as the leader of your school.
Mhm.
I'm reflecting as you're talking about that, and one of the simple activities that we do around getting clarity, and it's overlooked. In fact, we admitted as younger leaders, we didn't think having norms for teams was important.
Right.
You know, Richard Dufour has been talking about this for a very
Huge.
long time, and we didn't need that. That must be for schools where they either don't like each other or don't know each other
But
well.
we get
We
along
get along
fine.
so great.
Right.
But we had to
Right.
clarify how do we and make it crystal clear, how do we communicate with each other when we're working as a team?
Mhm.
And then even having the conversation that if we've said arrive on time and prepared, let's talk about what that looks like when it's happening. And
Yes.
oftentimes when we do it with schools, we'll go to the counter side of it of what does it not look like to get really clear on that. And that simple
That's
activity,
outstanding.
yeah, it makes all the difference
Yes.
in the world. So,
Yeah.
hey,
Norms are huge and they're so easily overlooked.
yeah,
They
But
are.
without them, I mean, it's back to that systems piece, right? Like, I mean, that's even just a system for how we meet.
Yeah.
It's a system for how we communicate. It's a system for, you know, all of that, right? I mean, it's just you've got to have norms. We could do a whole podcast episode on norms
We
uh-huh.
too,
could.
by the way. We
We
really could.
absolutely could. So,
Yeah.
hey, we also saw posted up just recently a school leaders weekly planner. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because
Yeah.
I know we are going to have
Yeah.
listeners that'll be very interested in that.
Yeah, so well, I'll make sure you have the link for that. You can drop in your show notes. But so yeah, recently we just released this School Leaders Weekly Planner, completely free tool. And the idea of putting together this planner is, again, to help leaders step away from that firefighter mode and to just simply get into that space where they have a little bit more control of their time. You know, I mean, as a school leader, one of the things you can't do is create more time. Boy, if you could, we'd all be all over that, right? So the idea here is just to help, have a place where you can set your weekly priorities. Again, this is the clarity piece, right? Have some daily prompts that kind of help you identify and tackle the most high impact tasks. We were talking about that with the screen printing thing, right? That is a really low level impact thing when it comes to leadership. As school leaders, you need to be working as much as possible on high impact tasks, right? Included in this, we've got some reflection tools to help you kind of capture, what are the wins that you had? What are some growth opportunities? Because no week is perfect, no day is perfect. So we have that. We have that actually right now as a free item as part of our new Principal Academy here at Road to Awesome. We're launching a brand new course called Take Control of Your Leadership. This planner is actually a tiny little element inside of the 6 modules of this course that are all about helping leaders to just really take control of their leadership, to gain some clarity, to be intentional with time management, to really be focused on instructional leadership, on building school culture and climate, growing the people around them, and then just staying focused on that vision that we've talked about so many times. So that's what we're working on there. I'll make sure you guys have links for all of that stuff that we're doing here with the Principal Academy.
Beautiful.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
All right. So
yeah, we're really fired up about it.
I bet.
As we wind up this conversation, Darrin, can you let us know once again, what's the best way that any of our audience can get a hold of you if interested in the course that you've discussed or any of the other resources that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to the website, it's roadtoawesome.net. That's by far and away the easiest way to get a hold of us. There's a contact us link on every single page on the website. Also, when you get there right away, you get the opportunity to join our subscriber list and get our, weekly newsletter and all of that kind of stuff. If you're a social media person, you can find me on all social media platforms at Darrin M. Peppard. I spend most of my time now, honestly, on LinkedIn and on Facebook. I dabble a little bit in TikTok. And I think I'm part of the fading from X group that's just not showing up as much there, but I'm still there. So you can still find me there.
Yeah, I think we're part of that club.
We're part of that club too.
All right, Darrin, as always, it's great to be able to connect with you once again, my friend, and really your wisdom and the way you articulate the things we need to be thinking of as leaders when really trying to build and sustain that culture of collaboration is so valuable. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
I appreciate
Darrin.
you guys both so much for having me on the show, for catching back up with me, and doing a home and home, folks. We're doing a home and home because Kurtis is going to be joining me on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. I don't know which one will come out first. We'll see what happens.
We'll try and whichever it works, we'll put the links in for that as well. All right, Darrin,
there we
thanks
go.
so much, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Right on. Thanks, guys.
So I always love hearing from Darrin because not only is the ideas and themes that he comes with really critically important, but then the specific of, well, here's a strategy that you can use. Here's a specific story, a specific example. So critical. And I really think this reinforces, again, what we continue to talk about, what keeps coming back as a key theme around systems. Creating systems, creating structures, creating processes that then we can replicate over and over, and involving our people in helping to develop and design those systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea of, or the question of, do you want to be a firefighter or do you want to be a leader of a school? And just thinking about the reactive mode that we get into in that firefighting stance, that we're just constantly reacting to whatever comes our way, trying to manage as best as we can. But really, going back to what you said about the structures and processes, when we think about how do we move out of that reactive mode, it's always about being able to put some structures in place that are going to help support us in a particular situation, but more importantly, long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think too that it's through that, and he mentioned the idea of empowerment. How do we then empower people within those systems to jump into other roles, to take on different responsibilities? And I love what he's saying of, sometimes we're apprehensive to ask that of people because people are busy. We don't want to add more onto plates, but quite often, and we've seen this as well, similar to his secretary who thrives or who thrived when empowered to be able to take on some of those responsibilities.
Well, and when we take everything on ourselves as leaders in that Superman mode, then we actually, and the way that I look at it is we actually rob people of the ability to be able to learn some leadership skills or to be able to participate in the decision making, which is really thinking about, if we're going to create a collaborative culture, we need every opportunity to gather voices, to gather input, to really listen. We talked a lot about listening this episode, and being able to listen and then respond to the fact that we hear what you're saying, and that has influence on the decision making going forward.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we'll make sure to put into the show notes is that team norms. We've developed a team norm guide. We talked a little bit about the norms, but creation of that is so critically important. So we'll make sure that that's available. As always, please reach out if you have questions or ideas, suggestions that you have around building a culture of collaboration. And huge thanks to our guest, Darrin. It's really enjoy getting a chance to connect with him.
It was a wonderful conversation once again. So thank you so much, Darrin, and take care, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Jigsaw Learning, founded by Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, is a team of educators who work with schools, districts, and educational leaders to establish collaborative response to ensure success for all students. Because every child deserves a team.